Now let us consider the words of the Australian Deputy Prime Minister, Mr Tim Fischer, when he spoke to a group of professional shooters at Alice Springs in May 1996. If we don't get it right this time, then next time there is a massacre, and there will be, then they'll take all our guns off us. What Mr Fischer is stating is that unless Australia brings in the required legislation, then Australia was going to suffer another massacre. The legislation was initiated and Australia has had no more massacres. The fact that many have ignored the new ideology-bound firearm laws and that firearms are still easily obtainable on a black market is irrelevant to these laws. However, what must also be considered is the comparison between the statement made by Tim Fischer and the then Premier of New South Wales, Barry Unsworth, back in December 1987, when he prophesied there will never be uniform gun laws in Australia until we see a massacre in Tasmania. He was quite right. After the massacre at Port Arthur, Australia did get a form of uniform gun laws, but not quite what Barry wanted. We should also consider the actions of the Australian Prime Minister up to and on the 10th of May 1996, when the new laws were implemented. The fact that the 10th of May meeting had to make its decision in time for the evening news is straight out of a James Bond fictional scenario. Here is the 6 o'clock news. Big Ben chimed 3 times today at 2 o'clock, and the Australian Prime Minister, Mr John Howard, was successful in forcing the various states and territory police ministers into accepting his unconstitutional new guidelines for a total firearm control in Australia. Right? But there are other political ramifications regarding the uniform firearm laws in Australia, and Graham Richardson appeared on the Today Show about the 5th of May, after the Port Arthur massacre, and just prior to Mr Howard announcing his 10th of May meeting, and laid out the whole political scenario of why the Port Arthur massacre had to happen. Graham Richardson told us why it had to happen. Barry Unsworth had discovered, in his effort to retain the New South Wales government in 1988, that any government that moved into the area of gun control would lose power at the next election, be that state or federal. Again, because of the moves against the gun owners of Australia, there was a new political party born, and that party had to be destroyed before it gained too much strength within the political sphere. However, Graham Richardson gave out one further clue to demonstrate just what the push was regarding firearm control, and that was the shift of power from the states to Canberra. Graham Richardson stated that the easiest way for uniform firearm laws would be for the states to cede their constitutional powers in relation to firearms to the federal government. However, we are then informed that Premier Bob Carr had already initiated legislation in regard to ceding that power to the federal government. Now, this was before John Howard had announced his national guidelines policy, and it must be viewed as a ploy to have the Prime Minister adopt the full Labor Party policy in relation to gun control, a policy that emanated from the United Nations. What this demonstrates is that the moves for a total firearm control in Australia is based on that power being controlled by Canberra. And that policy lines itself up with other initiatives that have emanated from Canberra in the past decade, such as a push for a republic and a new constitution, which would give Canberra complete control over Australia, which was the complete opposite to all those Australians who realised the dangers of centralised power and opted for the American system of federation of states back prior to 1900. What happened in regard to the Port Arthur massacre was that the entire judicial system was stifled. We were never permitted to have any form of a proper trial for the accused Martin Bryant. We were never permitted to have a coronial inquiry, nor shall we ever get any such proper inquiry into that tragic event that has affected so many Australians. Our constitutions have been overruled. Our judiciary has been compromised so much so that we appear to be that of Keating's Banana Republic. And our government representatives no longer hear the voices of their constituents. So what happens the next time Australians feed to hear the new ideology? Who will they murder to bring us into line? Will it be your parents, your brother or sister, or your children or your grandchildren? Don't say it will never happen, because it already has. Had Australia had one politician with the guts, with the integrity and the honesty to tell Australians just what had happened, then the bluff would have been called. And little Johnny Howard would never have had to wear his flak jacket at Sale or in Queensland. Australians, though, are not that lucky.